My first contact with Sasquatch was when I was 12 years old. I was playing in the deep woods, 100 yards from my back door. Back in those days, there weren't a lot of expensive toys to occupy my time, so I was playing Army all by myself. I was in a location where there was an ovular, I can't pronounce that word. I was in a location where there was an ovular ring of trees, and when they shed their needles, they made an ovular buildup around their bases. Inside this shape, there was also a pile of dry needles that made a nice cushy spot. Anybody new to this podcast, there are some words that I can't pronounce, so I just throw something out there and look for people in the comment section to correct me because I know you will. But the word is ovular, ovular. I think maybe that's what it is. Anyway, sorry to get hung up on that. Back to the story. I was playing soldier there and decided I needed to do a quick hide and cover. And I dove into this bed of needles like I had many times before, but this time I startled a large animal. When I landed, something big and heavy took off and ran away. It felt like thunder in the ground, even on that bed of needles, and I felt every step it took vibrating through the earth. I had never heard about Sasquatch, but at that moment, all I could think was that I had snuck up on some kind of a giant, and then it ran away. My second contact was during a hunting trip with my brother. At that time, I was 30 years old, and we were hunting in the hills of North Goldendale, Washington, near the Yakima Indian Reservation border. We had been hunting for about an hour when I broke into a large clearing where the sun had started to shine. There was a big stump, so I sat and leaned against it with my rifle in my lap to watch the clearing. But the sun was so warm and I was so tired from working the graveyard shift the night before that I soon fell asleep. I must have napped for an hour. When I woke, my eyes focused across the clearing at the timberline. And there it was, a Bigfoot in a squatted position, and he was studying me. As soon as it noticed that I was awake, it stood up and it turned and it walked away. I was so stunned that I didn't even get up to try to follow it. It was 2 minutes later when my brother called my name and asked if I had seen anything. I sure as hell did, I felt like saying, but instead I laughed and I said I hadn't. The third contact happened while I was hunting in the hills of the Columbia River. I was watching a ravine that was filled with scrub oak trees. It was bushy at the top, but open in the ravine. I was sitting there and I heard a noise coming down the ravine like an entire herd of deer was headed my way. I got ready to pick a target, but no deer ever came. Instead, a stampede of gray squirrels raced through the treetops like Satan himself was on their heels. At one point, when the stampede passed by me, there was an intense, stinky, horse sweat, body odor smell that filled the area. When the stampede passed me, so did the smell. I never saw anything, but I did feel like that I was not alone. My fourth contact happened when I took my grandson camping on the side of Mount Rainier and the White Pass. The first evening, I heard a Sasquatch call. It was impressive how much air this thing's lungs could load. His bellow lasted for 20 full seconds. I tried to emulate it, but I ran out of air after about 8 seconds. My fifth contact happened when I took my wife camping in the White Pass. The first day we were there, we walked along the rocky beach of the river that we were camping next to. The river rock was not easy to walk on, but was apparently great for making, okay, here's another word, cairns, C-A-I-R-N-S. Never heard that word before in my life. These are man-made piles of flat stones. There were 2 at the time. I added a small rock at the top of one stack, and the next morning, the stacks had all been leveled. I think Bigfoot walked through there and said, "Not today, hippie." Have y'all seen those videos where people are knocking those down? I think they're funny. The second night we were there, a Sasquatch came into our camp while we were sleeping, ran a finger along the side of our tent, right against my wife's back. It startled her awake, but she didn't tell me until we were home from the camping trip. And the sixth and final encounter, six in his life. Unbelievable. The sixth and final encounter was when my wife and I were camped in the upper Clickitat Valley. This time I had taken gifts. I had taken silk flowers, marbles, a large plastic toy soldier, and a box of apples. Unfortunately, I became ill the first night there and decided that we needed to sleep in my pickup truck. The apples were left in the bed of my pickup truck. My wife's little yapper Mutt was along with us, and I had the windows down a couple of inches for ventilation. We heard nothing the entire night, and the dog never barked or growled once, but the next morning the entire box was gone. The debris on the forest floor prevented me from seeing any tracks, but we were the only campers for miles. I think a sly Bigfoot was laughing at us while he ate the apples throughout the night. Oh, that's a good story. I don't know. I guess I'm jealous of these people that have encounter after encounter after encounter. They see them all the time. I can't even see a footprint. I never see anything. What is it about me that keeps me from seeing a Bigfoot? I want to see a Bigfoot. Everybody else sees them. Everybody that writes me sees them and encounters them. Some people multiple times through their lives. Not me. I know I'm kind of acting like a baby, but I kind of feel a little pissed about it. Anyway, I'm glad y'all see Bigfoot, but I'm not glad I don't. So how yak at? Anyway, this was a very good story, well put together, and I appreciate the writer sending it because it is very interesting. Thank you. This was an ongoing encounter that went on for a month or two. This event happened in 1994 in the Midwest. I worked nights doing custodial work and my family lived out in the country. It wasn't all that remote, just the rural part of a small town. Each time I arrived home and got out of my car after work, I started noticing lights in the sky. They seemed lower and brighter than the other stars and much closer. It was a bright white light, but I also saw blue and red flashes with pulsating lights. The light didn't move across the sky like an airplane, or I would have just assumed that it was that and I would have moved on. There were at least 2, sometimes up to 4 of them spaced out in different directions. The lights seemed to be observing somehow. When I saw them, it was like they moved in closer to me, zooming in on my location. They would remain in the same spot for hours and then drift away slowly, but sometimes it was as if they shut the light off. Stars don't do that. We had an outdoor barn light on a pole in the backyard. When these lights in the sky appeared, the backyard light would get brighter, as if someone was slowly turning up the intensity. I noticed that if a car went down the road, the light would gradually dim back to normal. And then when the car was gone, the light would gradually intensify again. The barn light would be so bright that it looked like early morning right before the sun came up. When I went inside, every lamp or electronic device, the stereo, the numbers on the digital alarm clock, and anything with a light got more intense, just like the barn light, and then would slowly go back to normal. The lights would all be in sync and would all do it at the same time. I got an uneasy feeling while this went on. I felt like whatever was causing this was waiting for me to come home. One night, I waited in my car and sunk down in my seat. I just waited and watched for the lights to intensify. Now, this freaked me out, so I waited for the lights to dim when the car went up the road and then ran for the house and hid behind the recliner for a few hours. I did this for several nights. Of course, no one else in the house saw anything, and I started to think I was losing it. I was no longer curious as to what was causing this. I just wanted it to go away. I would come home and walk in and turn off the lamp my family had left on for me, and I'd find my way through the dark. I felt like something or someone was looking for me, and paranoia started to set in. During this time, I also had trouble sleeping. Several times I had sleep paralysis. I'd be in that state in between sleep and awake, and I couldn't move my body. The only thing I could move was my eyes. I didn't see a thing, but I felt this terrible dread and uneasiness come over me. I couldn't speak at all. Even my tongue was numb. Eventually, I was able to force a word out. If I forced the name of Jesus out, it would stop. The light shows seemed to escalate over time. One night, while making my way to my bedroom in the dark, I walked past the door to my parents' room, which was open. Out their window, I saw what looked like searchlights, like the extremely bright white light you see on a police helicopter searching for someone on the ground. It was shining the light back and forth across the driveway, then the yard, and then into their window, but I knew there was no helicopter. There was only a low rumble that went on all night, like the gentle rumble of an air conditioner kicking on, but deeper and so heavy you could feel the vibration of it. I hid in my bed until I eventually fell asleep. That next morning, after my family had all left for work, I could still hear that low rumble. After a while, whatever it was finally left, and the rumbling sound drifted above the clouds. I saw nothing outside, but I had the TV on the morning news, and while I was watching out the screen door, the TV turned off. Well, that was it for me. I was totally freaked out, and I drove to my boyfriend's apartment. That weekend, while hanging out with him, I swore I still heard the low rumble above the clouds above his apartment, as if it was following me. I was a basket case for a while. One morning, my mother got up and found me crouched behind the reclining chair, hiding from the lights. Eventually, I had to start ignoring the blinking lights in the sky, or I was going to be committed. I have no doubt about that. I started going inside when I got home, not looking up and straight to bed or doing sit-ups until I was so exhausted and I had to go to sleep. To my relief, my then boyfriend and now husband saw the lights too. One time he flipped one off from his car while he was driving, and in front of our eyes it literally shut off. We both saw that happen. Even today, I occasionally notice the blinking lights every now and then, but I ignore them. I live in a different state now. I decided it was not just me they were watching and observing. They were waiting for someone to notice them. And my husband is the only other person who has heard this entire story. I didn't dare share all of it with others, and we all know why. Oh, wow, that's kind of scary. I'm assuming she shared the whole story with us. I've heard of stories like this. I've gotten stories like this where people are just tormented by something and they never know what it was. My thought and always goes to, well, like she said, I'm just repeating what she said. I'm not accusing her of this or diagnosing this problem, that she was just paranoid, but this letter seems perfectly legible. It doesn't wander all over the place. Seems like a person who has their thoughts together and that who knows what they saw. It's scary. I'm glad to find out that this is eased up quite a bit. A lot of people will say you've probably been visited by whatever these things are. And the longer time goes on, the more evidence. We just saw videos on the news of some kind of craft flying over the top of the ocean, and I can't even remember where it was. Somewhere in the Middle East, I think. I believe the Americans shot a Hellfire missile at it and hit it, and the missile just like either went through it and a couple of three little pieces broke off of this, whatever this UFO was, but they didn't fall in the water. They just kept going with the craft. I know hundreds of people have seen this video, and I don't even know if you haven't seen it, what to tell you to search for. I just kind of flipped through these shorts a lot of times and it popped up and I thought, man, that's crazy. Anyway, here's what I'm getting at. This stuff is becoming more and more and more evidenced, much more than Bigfoot. There's 100 times more evidence for paranormal beings from another realm, another planet. There's 100 times more evidence of that than there is for Bigfoot. And people aren't interested, at least on this channel, as much as in these UFO stories. But it really intrigues me because it seems more real, because there's more evidence. And I know people say, hell, there's pictures and videos of Bigfoot all over the place. 99% of them are hoaxes, and they're obviously hoaxes. But this stuff right here, these lights and these crafts flying around and under the ocean, in the ocean, we've got videos of all these things by military. The people in the federal government are coming out and saying it's real. It's everywhere. So what is all this stuff? Some people say it's demonic. Why would a demon use a UFO to try? It just doesn't, none of that makes sense. I'm not saying I know what it is, but I'm saying there's a lot of stuff. If you just use critical thinking skills, you can rule out a lot of things that people think it is. This was an interesting story, and I'm glad to hear that she is doing better and not as tormented as she was. Thank you for sharing the whole story. I assume it's the whole story. Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you to the writer. In 2002, I was freshly divorced. I had very little money, and the time I spent with my children was precious. I wound up doing a lot of things outdoors in order to tire them out and get them away from their computers. My kids had a limited time to spend in the hot weather of Central Florida, so I used to take them for bike rides at the local park. One time we were 2 miles into the park on our bikes when my daughter started sobbing and yelling, "Are we going now, Daddy? Can we go now?" She kept it up until we turned around and headed back to the parking lot. My son and I were concerned and a bit overheated, but we still giggled at her with her theatrical shouts. I was a bit upset to end the ride so early, but looking back, who knows what was really going on, or if she had seen something that scared her. In 2015, I was riding my bike alone in the same park, enjoying being outdoors and having the place to myself. An hour into my ride, I had gotten about 6 miles in when the rain shower started. I was pedaling through sugar sand and it was burning the heck out of my legs, so I decided to get off my bike and walk instead. I got to a place that I had passed on the way in. It was off the beaten path and had lakes and swamps and a clear path along the power lines. I decided to leave my bike and look around the swamps and the wetland for a bit. The rain was tapering off, but it was steady and it made the whole area look like it was in the shadows. To my left were swamps, and on my right was a saturated open field that led to the lake, with a power line in between the two. I walked along the power line path and I heard the distinct sound of something plunking away at bicycle spokes. It's a metallic sound that I knew from my children's bikes and mine when I was a kid. The sound stopped about 25 feet from me, right where I had left my bike, and I stopped walking. There was no other sound but the rain. In Florida, if you're near the swamps, there always seems to be frogs and other critters making a fuss, but at that moment there was nothing. I stood there for a moment listening and I heard someone whisper. It was almost unintelligible. It sounded like a little girl's voice talking to someone. She was asking a question. Now I was confused. I was not in a place where a child should be, and even if there were other people, I would have seen them. I waited another moment and then I said, "Hello?" Again, I heard more whispers from this little girl's voice. This time I heard her clearly and she asked, "When are we going to leave?" I was really confused. I couldn't see anything. The voice was coming from directly in front of me, but there was nothing there. It was just the little girl's distressed voice pleading to go home. I'm always comfortable in the forest, but I was starting to get a bit freaked out. And then the girl's voice screamed, "Are we going home now, Daddy?" The end of her sentence built up to a high-pitched scream that made my gut hurt. I was stunned and scared. My first instinct was to get the heck out of there. But for some reason my mouth betrayed me, and again I said, "Hello?" I took a step forward and betrayed my feet this time. Whatever was with me in the woods shot away from me at a speed that was supernatural, like it had been attached to a cable and was being pulled away, shooting across the wet, boggy Florida wetlands. I stood there with my head reeling, thinking I was about to throw up. I stayed where I was for 10 minutes, collecting my thoughts about what I had just experienced. I had seen nothing, but the voice, the scream, and the metallic sound of the bicycle spokes were stuck in my head. I eventually gathered myself and headed to the parking lot without any other incident. Oh man, that's kind of spooky. I don't know, this may sound weird, but it's kind of intriguing to me. I don't think there was anything there that he felt was after him, but I don't know, what do you guys think? What was he hearing? A lot of people say ghosts are demonic. I tend to go that route. I'm a Bible believer, and I believe, we're either here or we're with the Lord, and the only thing left on earth are living humans and demons. And I don't know. I could be wrong about all that. I don't make y'all know I never talk about spiritual stuff or political stuff too much. Never political stuff. Good Lord. Man, what a world we live in with this political junk. But this supernatural stuff, spiritual stuff, sometimes it perplexes me. And I was talking to my wife the other day about, it was nothing about this. But what I've learned in my life is that usually with big problems or big incidents, there's always the one thing. And people try to complicate it and spread it out and make it about a bunch of things. It's usually the one thing, but here's what I'm getting at. I think the one thing is in these type situations is that it's probably a demonic presence somewhere that you've encountered. That's just my opinion. I'm not making a categorical statement or a singular statement. That's just what I think it is. And it kind of goes along with my one thing theory. There's always that one thing. Anyway, thought I'd share my thoughts with you on that. Not sure why I did, but just kind of popped in my head, so I thought I'd say it. So there you go. Thank you to the writer for sending the story. It was really good, kind of spooky, but very intriguing. Thank you. I grew up in the wild and wonderful state of West by God, Virginia. Now I live in Kentucky, just across the Big Sandy River. I don't know if I believe in cryptids, aliens, or anything ghost-related, but I am 100% sure that I believe in shadow people because I encountered one when I was 8 years old. This happened in a small town in West Virginia named Fort Gay in Wayne County. We lived in an old 2-bedroom, 1-bath house rented to my family by a man named Frank. He owned dozens of rental homes and hundreds of acres of property in our little town. According to several neighbors and other town residents, in the 1950s, Frank used our house to meet with some other men in town to drink, gamble, and do things that were publicly frowned upon back in those days in a small religious town. One night back in the 1960s, Frank and his friends were drinking and playing poker. Someone accused another of cheating at cards, and tempers flared. Somebody pulled a gun and blew a man's brains out right there in that very house. My big sister and I had to share the second bedroom, which wasn't a problem, since we were just little kids at the time. My aunt and uncle hadn't seen our new place yet, and they were coming to spend the weekend with us in the new house. My mom set up our room for them, and that meant one of us had to sleep on the couch, and the other got to sleep with Mom and Dad. I don't know if you remember sleeping with your parents at this age, but I absolutely dreaded it. I always got stuck between them and got pinned down by the covers. Plus, I had to listen to my dad snoring and sleep talking. I had been lying in bed with them for about an hour or so. My parents were already fast asleep and the house was dead quiet. I was burning up under those covers as usual, and I was wishing like crazy I had used the bathroom before I went to bed because my eyeballs were floating. I dreaded going because I knew I had to crawl over one of my parents and take the chance of waking my dad, who was definitely not someone you wanted to disturb out of a deep sleep. I decided my best option was to dig out from under the covers and crawl over my mother. What happened after that was a pure nightmare fuel, especially for an 8-year-old kid. I began the task of trying to get over my mother without making too much noise and avoiding waking my dad at all costs. I had my right leg flung over my mom, looking for the floor with my toes and holding on to the bedpost with my left arm, when all of a sudden, the worst, most hair-raising feeling came over me and went up and down my spine. Every hair on my neck and body stood on end. I could feel a presence behind me at the bedroom doorway, and I could feel something was there and that its eyes were on me. My mind started racing and my heart started pounding, and I was completely frozen in that awkward position. I didn't want to, but I knew I had to look at the dark doorway. I turned my head, praying that it would be just my sister. I couldn't have been more wrong. I can only describe it as a shadow person. It had the basic form and size of a human, but it was featureless. It had no discernible face. When I say it was black, I mean it was darker than the darkest corners of the room. It was highlighted by the hallway light that my mom had left on for anyone who might get up in the middle of the night, which made it seem even darker. It was a shadow, but deeper and darker than a shadow, like black silk or a black hole. Many people who suffer from a condition called sleep paralysis often report seeing a shadowy man they call the Hat Man. This thing did seem to be wearing a hat, but I was completely awake, and this was not a case of sleep paralysis. This thing didn't move or speak a word. It was just standing there, peeking around the doorway at me. To say that I almost had a heart attack would be a severe understatement. I didn't know what to do. Should I scream and wake my parents in hopes they would see what I'm seeing? No, instead I slowly slipped back over my mother, and I slid under the covers and I pulled them completely over my head. I didn't dare peek out or try to look at this thing again. I just knew if I pulled those covers down, that thing would be closer, right at the foot of the bed or worse, face to face with me. At this point, I completely forgot about needing to go to the bathroom, and honestly, I don't know how I didn't wet myself after I saw what I saw. I was stuck there under the covers, afraid to move, afraid to look again, heart pounding in fear. I don't know when, but at some point I must have finally fallen asleep, probably out of exhaustion. When I woke up, that experience and the fear of it were still fresh on my mind. I could hear my parents and sister and my aunt in the kitchen getting breakfast ready, and I was glad I was still alive to wake up at all. I jumped out of bed and ran with all I had to the safety of my family in the kitchen, and I told my parents everything. Of course, they chalked it up to a bad dream by a kid with a wild imagination. We lived in that house for 4 years, and everyone in my family would eventually go on to have weird experiences, which are stories for another day. And something about that old creepy house just never did feel right to me. I believe something evil was living there. I'm an adult man. I'm a husband and a father now, but I will swear to my grave that this was real and was not a dream or my imagination. I've never had anything like that happen to me since, and I pray that it never does again. I wouldn't wish something like that on anyone, not even on my worst enemy. Oh, what a great story. Man, I didn't read this. I zip a lot of these up and I send these to Rebecca Lee Wesson, who, by the way, is a great author and has books out on Amazon. Look up Rebecca Lee Wesson. She's editing all these stories that you hear. But what I was going to say is, I don't know if this guy wrote this well or if Rebecca put her magic on it. But man, it was just so fun to read and so well put together. I don't know. It's probably not going to go down in historical literature by any stretch, but Sometimes the stories are great, but the way they're written is, oh man, it just sets them off. He doesn't say whether to give his name or not, but he lives in Kentucky, born in West Virginia. I got this story a while back. I hope he hears this because, man, what a great story. Thank you so much for sending this. If anybody else has stories about the paranormal or whatever, I have a lot of them to do right now. I've just got a big backlog. But if you send me a really good one, I'm liable to pull it up and just do it right away. So I really appreciate you all sending these stories. They're so fun to read. And anyway, I appreciate it. Thanks to the writer. Ghosts of Tula by Shane Brown. I remember being a little kid and Mama walking around videoing anything and everything she could. She would use that camera all day. She said that she never had anything that neat before. I think she believed that she would have each moment forever when she hit the record button. That camera was huge and it hurt your shoulder to hold it propped up for a minute. I guess it didn't bother her. She gleamed with it. She was getting something new and recording her babies. Recently, I watched a video of us at my grandmother's house having lunch one day. Leanne and Billy Ray were fighting while Mama was in the background frying chicken and baking biscuits. Dad was leaned back in a chair watching everyone. Mama threw the camera on him and asked him about the ghost story from a call he got the night before while he was on duty at the fire station. The dad was wearing a navy blue firebuster shirt, and he leaned his head down and his eyes got big. He twisted the sides of his ear with a finger and a thumb as he chuckled. Then he shivered. He told the story of what he saw that night on a call. I don't believe him as surely as I study every word that he said. I didn't believe in ghosts at 9 years old. Now, Webster says that ghosts are the soul of a dead person thought of as living in an unseen world or as appearing to the living people. Webster can't describe what I know, but he is close. Maybe Webster is telling me I know a soul that still lives, that it's appearing to me. I think I know his feelings, too, from spending time at Tula. I'm starting to know instead of only wondering. At 43, I don't know if I truly believe in ghosts yet or not. I've never seen one. I have never considered for 1 second that my eyes witnessed a ghostly motion, but I feel things. I wonder if ghosts can make you feel things. If they can, then I believe in them. That's something that happens to me often, especially at Tula or somewhere my father frequented. I am sitting on the docks of Tula right now, and it's almost haunting. Not a scary haunting, but a gut-wrenching one. Crickets are calling and the bullfrogs are loud. They echo off the trees and through my body. There's a white cloud of fog sitting on this pond as its glow dances from the moonlight. The moon's cast is wrapped in a fog which shows the pond's general shape. The moon's light runs about 6 or 7 feet to the bank and up the trees and to their tops as it shines up the back into the sky. The white fog just sits in a gloom. It doesn't move, and neither do I. There's a presence here. This presence makes me want to write stories. Maybe this is the presence that makes me want to be like my dad. I'm not for sure yet, but I like both of those thoughts. I know I'll never be the writer that he was. I'm okay with that. But if I can be a writer with a connection to him, then it's all worth the sacrifice. There's a presence over me and under me. I feel it in both of my sides, too. It's the truck I got to pick out from my dad one day when he said he wanted a pickup with air conditioning, a CD player, and powered windows as he sent me and Mom to Tupelo to buy it. It's the presence that I feel when I'm asleep at the old Tula store he owned that's been renovated into an apartment. It's the store he wrote about in Joe, where the protagonist would pick up his workers. But the feeling down on the pond at Tula is more powerful than any I've ever felt. It's a feeling where I start to believe in ghosts. I don't see it, but I believe it. All right, here's a story I got. I'm going to call this fiction because it just feels like it's fiction, but I guess it could be true. The writer did not say. If it's true and I'm calling it fiction and the writer gets upset with me, just don't. This just feels fictiony the way it's written and the story in itself. However, it's a really good story. So let's do this. 19 months ago, I awoke from a coma, unable to move, speak, or even see what was happening around me. I had a vague awareness of who I was. I had a family, a job, a portfolio, and a name. I knew something terrible had happened to me, but I couldn't remember what it was. I remembered the frantic and helpless sensation of trying to escape and then being thrown through the air. I remembered a great crippling fear, but the details were beyond me. I searched the darkness in my head, but it was useless, like looking through foggy glass. I knew the facts of my life and what had happened to me were on the other side, but I couldn't see them. I couldn't see them yet. I could hear the voices in the distance and the footsteps approaching and fading away, and I could hear the slow beep of a heart monitor as it started to pick up speed. The footsteps approached me again and they ran away, summoning a doctor and a team. "He's awake, get the team here," a woman said in an excited voice. There were multiple footsteps in the room now, each set hurried and shuffling around the bed. The team was talking about me in hushed voices, though I didn't understand the medical terms they used. One of them was instructed to notify my family. Jonathan. I remembered my name was Jonathan. That felt like a win. It was minuscule, maybe, but a win nonetheless. The sudden burst of energy, after what felt like an endless idle rest, put a strain on me and I fell back to sleep. And when I woke, I heard hushed voices again. This time I recognized one of them. It was my wife. Her name was Madison. That's another win, I told myself. She was reading from the book of Proverbs. I fell in love with her all over again. It was the voice I needed to hear. My eyes opened and the room erupted in excitement. I could make out colors and the details of my surroundings. I was unable to move my head, but able to turn my line of sight. I could see a woman to my right, and I studied her features and her long gray hair and her familiar smile. It was my Madison. She was older now. Now I was confused. A young man and two younger women stood beside her, one of them holding a baby. They were my children, but they had grown. One at a time, they came to the bedside and hugged me. They told me they loved me and they missed me. I realized then that I must have been in a coma for some time and kept alive by machines. But for how long? I had no clue. My family had grown up without me, and the realization was overwhelming, and I had 1,000 questions. This routine went on for days. Deep sleep for hours, and awake for a few minutes, day in and day out. The medical team would tug on my leg and bend it, shine a flashlight in my eyes, and stick needles in my right foot and fingers. There was a brace around my neck and back, preventing me from moving, and at one point the doctors told me that my left leg had been so severely damaged they had had to remove it to save my life. Well, I was devastated. The realization about my leg sparked something in me. Like an approaching siren, I had a memory, not in images but in sound. It was a roar, and it terrified and confused me. It was real. It was too real. Like it approached and it faded back into the darkness of my mind. I hoped it would stay there. That was wishful thinking. I would soon find out. My improvement was marked by tiny daily successes, and in time I gathered enough air in my lungs to push out the words, "Thank you" to Madison. Within a minute the room was filled with medical personnel checking my statistics. And soon my hands and right leg regained feeling, and I began to move them, and I finally could speak fluently again. Communication with my wife was what I wanted the most. I learned I had been comatose for 5 years and 4 months. Brain trauma was the cause, and I was lucky to be alive at all. 5 years had gone by. I had been gone all that time. My son Nathan was now 17 and in his junior year of high school. He was playing football and he was quite good at it. My daughter Susie was a mother and in college, while my youngest daughter Brittany was 12 years old. I had missed so much, and I hadn't seen my son play ball. I didn't walk my daughter down the aisle, and I had missed my grandchild's birth. I missed Britt's first days of school. By then, I remembered who I was. I was a Harvard graduate with a PhD in business, a chief financial officer for a Fortune 500 company. We had a home in upstate New York, a penthouse apartment in New York City, and a vacation home in the Keys. My wife broke the news to me that my life, as I remembered it, was over. I had lost my job. My family was forced to sell our house upstate and the one in the Keys. They kept the penthouse in the city and subleased it to a guy who took over my position at work. They had moved to North Carolina and had been living off our life savings. At one point, 2 gentlemen came to see me, one from the forestry department and the other from the police department. They asked me questions for hours about what happened and what I remembered. I couldn't recall anything from the incident. They showed me pictures of a campsite that had been ravaged, a tent that was torn to pieces, and a backpack with a metal frame bent completely in half. They presented photographs taken by the hikers who found me. The pictures showed me in a blood-soaked sweatshirt and my head looking like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. There were other pictures of me from when I arrived at the hospital, my chest and my shoulder full of strange scratches and scars. I had 4 deep lacerations on my chest spaced 2 inches apart, and 1 deep laceration on the back of my shoulder below my neck. A photograph of my left leg had multiple lacerations, as if something massive had grabbed onto it and sunk its claws through the skin and muscle. I looked at the pictures objectively, having no recollection of any of this, nor any explanation for how it happened. After over a year of therapy, both mental and physical, I was sent home. It wasn't my home, though. It was a small place in a quiet subdivision with no sidewalks. But there was a porch where I could sit and read and look at pictures of my family and see what I had missed over the last 5 years while I tried to get my mind in better shape. We attended most of my son's football games during his senior year, and I got to see him take his girlfriend to homecoming. My life was coming back together. My walking improved with the prosthetic leg I had been fitted with, and I was working on my dance moves for Brittany's father-daughter dance at school. When Thanksgiving rolled around, my brother-in-law, Jeremy, came to visit us. He burst into tears and apologies when he saw me. I had to sit down. Seeing his face brought back a flood of memories. I should have been there. I should have stayed, he said over and over again. You had to go home, I said, suddenly remembering. He and I had planned a week-long vacation to hike a section of the Appalachian Trail with the goal of completing the entire trail within the next several years. We left my car at the end where we would finish our trek and took his car to the trailhead where we would begin. We arrived late the first evening, just a half hour before dark, and decided to put some miles on the boots before we called it a night. We hiked several hours before setting up camp and turning in. We slept like 2 tired puppies before the sun's light and singing birds woke us up the next morning. We planned to hike 16 to 20 miles that day and had one hell of a pace going. The beauty was breathtaking, and the birds were singing, and the deer were plentiful and unbothered by our presence. As evening approached, the sounds of nature began to die down, and the satisfaction we had from our hard work that day slowly gave way to an unsettling awareness that we were not alone. Something was stalking us in the woods. We called out that we were armed, though we didn't have anything other than pocket knives and hatchets. We decided that it must have been a couple of locals with a shine operation or a marijuana grow nearby, and we were being chaperoned. We stopped for the night and pitched our tent, wondering if our chaperones had gone home or if they had stayed nearby to patrol through the night. As we settled in, small pebbles began to hit our tent, and we did our best to ignore it, and we tried to sleep. The next morning, Jeremy got a call that his mother had been rushed to the hospital. I told him to head on back and that I would continue on to my car so he wouldn't have to backtrack and waste time. He tore down the trail like a cat with its tail on fire, and I packed up and headed out in the other direction. The better part of the day was uneventful, with no sign of our chaperones from the night before. But later that evening, they came back. I remembered walking to the last possible minute before pitching my tent and climbing in to sleep. After that, there was nothing. My next memory was waking up in the hospital. Over the next several months, I spent countless hours browsing the TV and the internet for anything that sparked my interest, as I had more time than anything else. I stumbled upon a Bigfoot documentary and found it to be very interesting until they played a recording of the creature's roar. I felt my knees bend to my chest, and I lay sideways on the couch, holding myself like a terrified child. And then I remembered everything. I had just climbed into my sleeping bag when rocks were pelted into the side of the tent again. I was growing frustrated at the thought of losing another night of sleep to the locals and their pranks. They poked the side of the tent, even touching my arm a time or two, and they prodded me. And through the side of the tent, I could see a figure standing in the moonlight. By then, I was fed up. I wanted to teach those clowns a lesson, so I grabbed my hatchet. When one of them prodded me again, I swung it with all my might. I struck his hand with the backside of the hatchet. I realized that whatever had been pestering me was not human. It roared like a freight train, and it grabbed the tent and it ripped it out from over the top of me. I jumped to my feet, ready to bolt down the trail, but something grabbed me by the shoulder and leg and lifted me above its head. And then, with the force of a car crash, I was thrown against a tree on the other side of the trail, and everything went black. I have no idea what attacked me or why. I have my suspicions, but I have no evidence. Part of me wished I didn't remember what happened. I longed for the time when the details were beyond me, when I was in the dark, and when the facts of my life and what had happened to me were on the other side of the foggy glass. But now I could see clearly. Something terrible had happened to me. Lying there on the couch in the safety of our new home, I felt the frantic and helpless sensation of trying to escape. I relived the fear, the great crippling fear, and I knew that my 19-month-old recovery was only just the beginning. How about we wind this podcast down with a dog story? I asked for them a couple of months ago, and I've got 6 or 8 that people have sent. I've done one. I've got a few to do, and I'm going to just drop them in periodically in a podcast. And then after this story, I'm going to put 2 archives at the end of this to give the video a little more length and for people who haven't heard these stories to enjoy them. So let's get into this dog story. I really like this one. I'm a cat lover, but I've enjoyed the company of more dogs than cats in my life. Some of the best friendships anyone can ever enjoy are with the pups and kitties that allow us to come near. My first love was a hound dog named Joe. He was dark brown with black markings. My mom called him Heinz 57. That meant he was a mutt. In all these years, I've never forgotten Joe, and I've often used his name to answer the old question, which was your favorite pet? I loved that dog, and I can remember hugging his neck, but he used to infuriate me because he wouldn't allow me to go down the driveway to the street. If I started toward the street, he stood sideways in front of me, and if I tried to move around him, he just moved with me. Eventually, I'd get mad at him and I'd start crying. This brought my mother and grandmother out to see why I was upset. Either way, I ended up getting my butt busted for going on the street when I wasn't supposed to, and I was made to stay on the back porch for the rest of the day. I never stayed mad at Joe for long. After all, he was just looking after me. He died when I was 5 years old, just before I started school. I was devastated. His passing taught me what death was and the permanence of it. His leaving may have left a hole in my heart, but my heart was bigger and warmer for having known him. I've been listening to you for quite a few months now, and I want to thank you for your stories. I love your even tone voice and your comforting comments about your readers and the authors of the stories you read. Thank you for sharing my little story in memory of my first true love, Joe, the Hind 57 of the Hounds. Well, you're welcome. Thank you for that nice paragraph there at the end of your story. But that's a great dog story. You know, dog stories are just good. They don't have to be long. Obviously, this was a short little story, but I felt it. I felt she's thought about what this dog did for her life all the way back before she would turn 5 years old. She remembers that dog was trying to keep her out of that street. And they're smart that way. They're put in our lives for a reason. Just another great dog story. And I want to tell the writer, she doesn't leave her name, but hopefully she'll hear this. And this was a great story, so thank you. So now we're going to drop a couple of archives behind this, and hope you guys enjoy them. If you've heard them before, just click away. But if you haven't, if you're new to the channel or haven't gone back through the library, you get a couple of new to you stories. So here we go. I'm a Cree Indian born in Saskatchewan, Canada. When I was 3 months old, we moved to British Columbia, where from an early age of 4, my grandfather would pick me up every day of hunting season and take me with him to get a moose. Of course, it was 99% road hunting because I was too young to be walking old log cuts and skidder trails. Regardless, I spent thousands of hours in the bush with my grandfather. As I grew older, my grandfather would pick me up after school each day to hunt. And on weekends, we were in the bush from morning until night. We had our favorite spot, and we were successful year after year. When I was 7, I was considered old enough to be given a .32 Winchester Special, a gun that I still own to this day. I've always been a big boy, so I was not bothered by the recoil. I used it to kill my first bull moose when I was 8. Once I was old enough to carry a weapon, my grandfather felt we would be more successful parking the truck and walking for hours into old cuts or hidden swamps. One morning in 1979, the year I was finally old enough to drive legally, we pulled up to an old skiddered trail that we had walked many times. It led to an old logging area that was like a magnet for moose. I dropped Grandpa off there and drove to another spot. I promised to be back in 2 hours to pick him up, and he promised to be waiting on the road when I got there. At 16, I was now carrying a 7mm mag. My grandfather had taught me about bears and what to do if they charged. My grandfather was a wise old hunter, and he said if a bear charged, to drop down on one knee so that I was on the same level as the bear, and then I would not miss if I had to shoot. I parked my truck and walked into my spot where it was very quiet. There I found a good vantage point and sat for an hour. During that time, I saw only a cow with twins. Not being in rut yet, I doubted any bull would be hanging around. It was time to go back and get Grandpa, so I hiked back out and drove back to the spot where I knew he would be waiting. My grandfather was always punctual. If he said he would be in a certain place at a certain time, he would be there. But this time, he was nowhere to be seen. I hadn't heard any shot, so I was pretty sure that he wasn't cleaning a bull. When 45 minutes had passed and he didn't come out of the woods, I began to worry. Grandpa was diabetic. I started thinking maybe he was in a medical distress, so I decided to drive down the skidder trail to find him. It was only about 3/4 of a mile to a clearing that was about 500 yards wide and 800 yards long where I parked and got out. The area was dotted with small trees and a few rolling mounds, but I could otherwise see as far as 150 yards around me. I started walking in the direction I thought Grandpa might be, reminding myself not to yell out as I went in case he might be onto something. 10 minutes into my walk, I noticed a powerful stench that I couldn't recognize, but I was too concerned about my grandfather to give it much thought. It was a quiet day, and a couple of minutes later, I noticed the sound of footsteps running away from me somewhere around 60 yards to my left. A mound blocked my line of sight, so I didn't see what it was. After 10 seconds, it stopped, and I needed to find my grandfather, so I dismissed it. A few more minutes passed, and I found my grandfather. He was sitting on a stump, looking pale. I said, "Grandpa, you don't look good. Is it your sugar?" He said there was nothing wrong with his sugar, and then asked if I had walked all the way in or if I drove. I told him the truck was only about 15 minutes away, so we started our walk out. I tried to get him to tell me what was wrong, but he wouldn't say. When I changed the subject by telling him about the horrible stench I had smelled not 5 minutes from where we were, he perked up. I described the smell to him, and then I told him about hearing something running, but that I didn't see what it was. To my surprise, he grabbed my arm and said, "Be on alert, but if you see anything strange, do not shoot at it." And I gave him a startled look, unsure of how to react, and he dropped his hand, looked down, and started moving again before adding, "Just keep walking." Well, this frightened me, and I don't scare easily. Neither did my grandfather, but there was no doubt that something had him worried. We made it back to the truck, and I saw that someone or something had broken off the antenna and the windshield wipers. Oh, I was furious. I'm 6'3" and 255 pounds, and I was a force to be reckoned with when it came to someone causing harm to my family or our property. I never heard of vehicle, so I assumed that whatever did this was on foot. I took off running to the main road, hoping to catch the culprit before they got away. I didn't get 50 steps before Grandpa called out to me to stop. Obediently, I went back to him, and as I did so, I noticed that the road around the truck was smeared as if someone was trying to hide their tracks. I pointed this out and asked why he thought that might be. He said he didn't know, and he urged me to get in the truck and get us out of there. Grandpa never spoke a word all the way home, which was completely out of character for him. Our drives home were generally filled with conversation about the day, what we'd seen or what we had not seen and why. But that wasn't the case today. It only served to increase my concern. Later, I spoke with my two uncles about Grandpa's behavior. I often hunted with them when I wasn't with Grandpa, and I thought they might have some insight. I told them everything that happened that day. One uncle said maybe he saw a Sasquatch, and he started laughing. My other uncle was a lot more attentive, though. Instead of laughing, he told me about a terrifying experience Grandpa had in 1963 when we first moved to British Columbia. He said Grandpa was alone in the McGregor area, northeast of Prince George, when he was approached by something. He was sitting on the edge of a tree line overlooking a clearing when he heard it coming from about 100 yards in the bush and heading straight for him. He thought it might be a grizzly because of the heavy footsteps, but it was walking, not running. My grandfather held his position with the safety off until all at once he saw a giant 10-foot-tall monster on 2 feet step into his view. It didn't see him sitting there as still and as quiet as a church mouse. The creature walked into the clearing just 15 feet from Grandpa, still unaware of him. Then the wind shifted slightly, and it turned its head and locked eyes with my grandfather. It started sniffing steadily, and then it dropped down to a crouching position. Grandpa was terrified. He didn't know if it was preparing to attack him or what it was going to do. In any case, he was sure that he was about to die. He slowly stood up from the stump, and the monster reared back and roared right into Grandpa's face. He felt the breath of its roar as it resonated through his body. He knew his 270 pounds was no match for this thing, and then it just stood there growling at him until he lowered his rifle, and that seemed to settle it a bit. Grandpa didn't know whether to run, walk away, or stay put. After what he was sure had to be 10 minutes, he heard something else way back in the trees making a sound he had never heard. The Sasquatch took note of the sounds and grunted one more time at my grandfather before it went back into the woods in the direction the sound had come from. Grandpa took the opportunity and ran like the wind back to his truck. It was a mile away. I understand about the ridicule people experience from non-believers, because when my grandfather would tell people about what happened, they would all laugh and say he was a nut and shouldn't be in the bush with a rifle. After a while, he just quit telling the story. He never spoke of it. I spent a lot of time with my grandfather. I knew his character, and I know he would not have lied about this. Once I'd heard the story, my next trip with Grandpa was filled with questions. He didn't want to talk about it until I said, "I believe that you saw what you saw, and I need to know what you know about these things so I'll have some idea of what to do if I ever encounter one." That seemed to do the trick. He told me he had never seen or heard or smelled another one until that day that I found him as white as a ghost, and then he went on to tell me what had happened that day. He said he'd reached the clearing 10 minutes before daylight, and almost immediately he heard a large tree break. There was no wind, so this puzzled him, but he decided to walk towards the sound, thinking it might be a big bull scraping his antlers on a tree. Once he figured that he was close enough, he sat and waited a few more minutes for shooting light. Even after he could see clearly, he waited for movement because he knew whatever had made the tree break was close. He didn't see anything move, but he was suddenly aware that he was being watched. Terrified now, he began to panic as the thought of his first experience flashed through his mind. He stayed frozen to the stump he was sitting on, and that's when he was overcome by a disgusting odor. Now he was on full alert. 2 minutes later, one of these things stood up 50 feet away from him. It was staring right at him. He could tell it was perturbed that he was there, and it kept looking back towards the tree line. Then Grandpa caught movement to his left as another, smaller one stood up. It was only about 6 feet tall. The big one beside Grandpa started making weird noises, and the little one answered it. And then the little one turned and went straight back down the trail Grandpa had come up. The larger one waited until the juvenile was out of sight and then walked right past Grandpa and followed the same trail the little one did. Grandpa said he was in shock and couldn't get his legs to move. He tried, but he was frozen to the stump. He was sure they were still close by when I showed up 2.5 hours later because of the stench I smelled. Hunting was my grandfather's way of life. He said he didn't want to tell me what had happened because he was worried that I wouldn't want to hunt anymore. He couldn't have been more wrong. My passion for hunting is just as strong as his, and I would never let anything stop me from being in the bush. I did eventually have my own encounters with them. I saw one once, and I've heard them on 4 other occasions, but those are stories for another time. My name is Matt, and this is not my story. I've never seen a Sasquatch, and I have mixed emotions about whether or not I would ever want to. This particular story comes from my Uncle Luke, who has been dead for 20 years. He was my favorite uncle. He was a no-nonsense kind of a guy who didn't believe in anything supernatural or creepy. He'd even get irritated when one of us kids would mention something like that, telling us if you haven't seen it with your own eyes, it does not exist. When I was a teenager, one day he told me he wasn't feeling well and wanted to tell me something. And I thought, oh no, here comes the birds and the bees talk. But I never dreamt he was going to tell me something that would blow my mind and actually scare the crap out of me. Uncle Luke was some kind of an engineer for the Navy. He traveled quite a bit for his job, and the story he told me was about one of those trips. One he said he would never forget. He was the kind of guy who never used road maps. He had a natural instinct for direction, so he rarely got lost. But once, while traveling through Georgia in a driving rain, he made a wrong turn on a clay road. The wet clay was as slick as ice, and he was struggling to keep from sliding into the ditches. Worse yet, the rain was coming down so hard he could barely see past the hood of his truck. He was looking for a place to turn around, but the road was so narrow there was nowhere to do so. He had no choice but to keep going forward. He drove another half a mile until he came across a tree lying across the road. There was no way around it. He sat there and weighed his options. Could he get the chain from the back of his truck and try to pull the tree out of the way? He doubted he'd be able to get any traction in the slick, wet clay. He also considered backing all the way down the road, but he could barely see moving forward. Moving backwards with only taillights would be even worse. There was always the option of putting on his flashers and taking a nap, but that would be giving up. He opted for the chain. He turned on his flashers and got out of the truck, slipping his keys into his pocket as he did so. He then pulled the chain from the bed of the truck. He was about 10 feet from the tree, and he wanted plenty of swing room. First, he hooked the chain to his truck and then walked over and wrapped the other end around the trunk of the tree. As he rose up, the headlights went dim. He looked up to see what had happened, and he felt his heart nearly seize in his chest. Standing in front of the truck, between him and the truck, was a creature that was every inch of 8 feet, with wide shoulders and reddish-brown wet fur. It just stood there. With the lights at its back and in my uncle's face, he couldn't make out its face, but he felt like it was staring at him. It grunted a couple of times, but it never moved. All my uncle knew was that it was between him and the truck. He didn't know what to do, but he couldn't keep standing there in the pouring rain having a staring contest with something he didn't even believe in. Finally, he put his head down and slowly walked past the creature back to the truck. As he got in, he reached in his pocket for his keys, but they weren't there. He grabbed the ignition, but they weren't there either. He looked out through the windshield to where the creature had now turned and was looking back at him. Beyond the creature, glistening in the rain and reflecting from the beam of the headlights, lying in the mud by the tree were his keys. His heart sank. Fear wasn't a familiar feeling for this man. It wasn't his nature to be afraid, but at this moment, he was terrified. With a deep breath, he opened the door and slid back out the truck, never taking his eyes off the creature, who was likewise not taking its eyes off of him. He walked past it, picked up the keys, and turned back around. He immediately realized the creature had moved over in front of the truck door. It let out a couple of huffs, and my uncle thought for sure that he was on the dinner menu. He had no other options, so he mustered up his courage once more and walked as calmly as he could around the creature and got back into the truck, locking the doors. He looked up as he started the engine and was momentarily relieved to see the creature wasn't there. But a movement from his direct left told him that it had moved next to the door. He ignored it and tried to back up. The tires only spun in the wet clay. His heart sank once again. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel, utterly defeated now. Then he heard a noise and he looked up. The creature had unhooked the chain and was now moving the tree out of the road. My uncle thought, can this get any stranger? He pushed the gas pedal and managed to get enough traction to move forward. He slowly drove past the creature. He rolled his window down and said, "Thank you." The creature grunted. He drove away with the chain still attached to the bumper. He never told another living soul what happened to him that night until he told me. He also never drove again at night. He passed away a few weeks after that, so I never got a chance to ask him where he was exactly. I guess the moral of the story is no matter how much you think you know, it might not be enough. Thank you for letting me tell my uncle's story.